Well, hello and welcome back, my friend. This week I'm joined by Stephen Leapley. And Stephen is a ghostwriter and has just done some amazing work as far as an author. He's coming out as retired from as a Navy corpsman. Man, I just think this is such the amazing thing. He's a dad of 8 doing RV life. I don't know about you, but man, I can look at just raising 4 kids and the patience that it took and the lessons that I had an opportunity to learn. So I think whether we're raising, 1 kid or 8 kids like Stephen, or, we're not even at that point, we can look and learn from, the situations that each of us are going through. And Stephen's got some great insight from his journey, and just totally excited to jump into the things that he has seen to be big pitfalls and challenges that we as men face. So, Stephen, how are you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing well today. Today's a good day. So thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I mean, we had an amazing conversation leading up to this and just really enjoyed the authenticity, the realness, just the genuineness of, hey, this is what life's been like. This is what life is like, and how things have changed to have that life transformation occur for you. And it's not done for any of us, right? We're still breathing air. We're still waking up tomorrow, hopefully. So as long as we continue to wake up, there's chances to learn and change and grow. Let's start off with, what does life look like for you today on the professional side of things, man?
I feel like I have multiple full-time jobs. So I have my ghostwriting business, which is my primary thing, where my focus is on helping veterans write their books and telling their stories. I have a degree in counseling and trying to figure out where that sits. And in that realm of getting my advanced degree, being a copywriter and coming from that side and really enjoying the process of writing, I picked up a client that, as we were writing his book, said, writing this book has done more for my PTSD than any therapy I've ever done. And in that desire to be a counselor, but in fighting the realm of the 300 million hours that you have to have somebody watching you counsel other people because your experience in life isn't enough, right? That was my way of being able to say, yeah, here's how I can give back. And so it really pushed me to niche down into my primary desire is to help veterans just write their books, whether it's a memoir, whether it's a memoir into business, whatever it is, like just helping them walk through that process. That's my primary professional life. The other side of my professional life is we have a farm. So I have 1 foot in corporate America, so to speak, and 1 foot in agriculture, and they are 2 completely different business models. So that's, we have a ranch and a farm. So I have cows and goats and chickens and turkeys and quails and pigs. And so there's that whole side of growing and developing a business with a family, creating a family business with that. And so those are the 2 things that keep me running professionally right now.
Yeah, I was going to say the farming and ranching, dude, that I think in and of itself would keep me busy. What about on the personal side? I mean, dude, you've got a lot just with the professional side. There's a personal side, I assume, too, right?
No, I'm rocking. Of course there is. So, you have to laugh at yourself because everybody else is, so you might as well join in. Yeah, I have 8 kids. We have 4 adults. So my wife and I we've been married 26 years this summer, and we have 7 kids. And then I have my oldest daughter is from my first marriage when I was in the military, and so I didn't raise her much, hardly at all, honestly. And so and she's 28. And then I have a 24-year-old, a 22-year-old, an almost 21-year-old, 16, 13, 9, and 4. So I just found out I'm going to be a grandfather. So I am literally sitting, like a couple of years ago, other than being a grandfather, I was literally in every single category of life. At one point we had baby, toddler, elementary, junior high, high school, adult. And so, that's a lot going on there. So, but it's, and personally, like there's good days and bad days. Most days are good days. And I think that's, we talk about, you and I were talking earlier, and just in prepping for today for me mentally, like there's still good days and bad days. And I think some of us strive to, like, we want to get to the good days and just move forward. And, but we forget that, there's 2 reasons for bad days. One, actually, I think there's 3 reasons. One, there's always going to be bad days, right? 2, bad days are there to remind us how thankful we are for the good days. And there's also the bad days that happen either because we do something stupid and we cause it ourselves, or there's something there for us to learn from. And so we forget that reality exists. And so when we have a bad day, it shoots us down. So I think remembering there's an important element to having bad days.
Yeah. And they're not like, they're not all consuming, and they're not every day, right? It's not oh my gosh, there's nothing to change. There's never going to be a good day. It may be a long stretch of challenging days, bad days, but it's not the only thing that's there. Like you're talking about, be grateful. What are the lessons I can learn? Am I, is this self-inflicted? I have made those, tons of those.
Yeah.
I wish I could say, Stephen, I've never done that. No, man, I'm grateful for the ones that aren't self-inflicted.
Yes. And the more reality based we are in that, and just aware of those bad days, the easier it is to remind ourselves that even if they're self-inflicted, they're not going to last. I say, like, bad days are like Dallas weather. Just wait 5 minutes, they'll change.
Well, dude, let's jump into the 5 A's that you were talking about, as far as things that can one lead to, like, other things that we face as challenges, but these can be things that are just compounding, right? It starts out as one thing, and how we respond to it can kind of deepen and intensify the situation that we're in, how we're showing up, and just who we're being at our core, right? Do you mind running through your 5 A's really quick?
Yeah. There's 5 A's of just things that guys go through, that I kind of put into what happens to us. It's addiction, abuse, apathy, avoidance, and atrophy. Entitled, like, just is, and I speak to those because I've walked through all 5 of them. And I think if we're honest, most of us have probably walked through those 5 too. And I think, as we were chatting earlier, like, addiction and abuse are the things that get the most attention, right? And because they're the most prevalently seen. It's the things that aren't seen, the apathy that we have, the avoidance that we take, and the atrophy of just, like, freezing, checking out. Those are the things that cause more challenges, I think, for us as men, and that we should be more aware of. And the more aware we are, I have another, like, little 3A. I don't know if I shared this with you, but there's a micro 3A too of awareness, accountability, and action, where we don't know what we don't know until we become aware. But once we become aware of, and I'll just take being an alcoholic because it's super simple analogy. If you have no idea that you're an alcoholic, or you're in denial. You're not aware of it, right? Once you become aware that you have an issue, then you have the responsibility to be accountable to that awareness. And that accountability leads to actions. So those actions might be, well, I'm just going to continue to be an alcoholic, or I'm going to make a choice to not be one. So that accountability to that awareness creates our actions.
Yeah. And a lack of action is still an action. I've taken that path before where it was like, I see it, I'm aware of it, and I really do not care. Like the pain is there from the situation, but I've just seen it as a hill I don't want to climb, something I don't see that I can succeed in, something that seems less annoying or painful than the pain of the situation. Is that something kind of like that you've seen where guys can take that decision of making no action as well?
100%. And I think that's the lack of action when action is needed comes from not wanting to be accountable, not wanting to be responsible of that. There's where the avoidance comes in of, I want to avoid the responsibility. So as long as I try to not be aware of it, avoid it or not see it or sweep it under the rug, whatever it is, then I don't have to be accountable. And so then if somebody calls me on the carpet, I can play dumb or literally put myself in a mindset of, I don't see it. You're always doing this or you're always doing, like, I don't see that. Accountability is such a huge thing. And it can be, it can be a buzzword that makes a guy go, I don't want anything to do with that because, that means I have to share my feelings. But the reality is when we speak the truth, it sets us free because we don't have to remember who we said what lie to about what, when, how, and all that stuff. It's just, if we speak the truth, the story never changes. It's important, especially in my life, what I found is to keep striving for the awareness, and when it comes, when I'm told of something that I'm not aware of, to not necessarily like shoot the messenger, right? Like don't take things personal, to be able to say, okay, you see this. Okay, well, now that you've made me aware of that, let me process that and see how that lands. So, and there's an acknowledgement that happens. Like when we acknowledge that we're aware of something, then we can become accountable. And when we acknowledge our accountability, then we can take the actions needed.
Yeah. And I think one key thing that I've found personally, is it depends on who's bringing the awareness. Because if it was like, okay, Stephen, you bring something to me. Hey, I'm seeing this in you, Mike. I have the chance to process it, versus if I had seen, like my parents, where that was not a healthy relationship, was very manipulative, or if there's other people that it's like, I don't want your life. How are you going about like validating it or processing through it to make sure, hey, yeah, this is actually something that I do need to, then have accountability and take action upon, to move it down the chain.
I think prior to anyone coming to you is being aware of yourself, in the sense of knowing who has the authority to speak into your life and who doesn't. So if someone has the authority to speak into my life, which for me, depending on the situation, overall life, my wife has the authority to speak into my life. And so when she comes to me, one, it's going to be the most triggering because it's the closest. But when I remember that she has the authority to speak into my life, I can receive that differently, with an awareness going, okay, she has the authority. She's speaking something into my life. I need to pay attention to this. Whereas if she were to come to me and say, we need to have a talk about how you do lead generation in your business. I'm going to be like, you have no authority to speak into that. And so I might still listen to her, but my responses are going to be different. If you're my boss, you can speak into my performance, but if you're my boss, you can't speak into how I'm going to raise my kids. Right. So it's part of it's situational and just being aware of who has the authority to speak into your life.
Yeah. And I think that is so crucial, is to understand we have that power to determine, hey, who is this person and what kind of, credibility or authority do I want to give them as far as their voice? If somebody doesn't have integrity, hey, I'm not going to listen to them about trust, or, how they're doing stuff. Whereas I may look at somebody and go, hey, they are doing great in their finances, but they're really struggling with their relationship with their kids. Okay, I'm not going to take parenting advice from them, much like you talked about. It can be kind of an area of life that you're giving somebody a voice and taking guidance from them or input, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's an overarching. And just because somebody wants to give us advice doesn't necessarily mean that we have to allow their advice to be seen as credible.
You hit the nail on the head, though. It's like people only have as much power in our life as we give them. I talked, years ago when Jack Canfield wrote a book called The Success Principles. And one of the first things he talked about was being 100% accountable for our thoughts, words, and actions. Right. And so I used to take that in my acronym junkiness. I said TWA, thoughts, words, actions. It's like an airplane. So I would teach my kids about, there's only 3 things that you're 100% responsible for, which is your thoughts, words, and actions, and those create our habits. And I tell them, other people's words and actions can influence how we act or what we say, but ultimately that what we say and what we do is our responsibility, regardless of what another person does. We're in a society where it's so easy to justify, it's so easy to blame, it's so easy to make excuses for or rationalize something, either something we do or don't do. And I think having, when we come back to that accountability piece and reminding ourselves that we are 100% responsible for what we think, say, and do helps.
It comes back to like relationships, right? Who do you want to have a relationship with, and in what way? Because just because somebody's family or close or they've been there doesn't necessarily mean they've earned like that position at the table, almost like a board of directors, right? To be able to speak into our life or that area of our life, because it's earned straight out, no question about it. And we want to be diligent and kind of, vet people of, do I let you have that voice speaking about this? And before, man, I was guilty of it. I mean, Stephen, if somebody came and spoke to me, I took it as like, contract, straight out. It was, I needed to follow it to the T. If I saw that they had power and I was looking for their validation. But the thing is, we're the ones that have power when we stop and look at it and get to determine who has that voice that you've spoken of, like you've spoken about. And, being able to hold us accountable. Cause I don't want somebody, if they're having a bad relationship, to hold me relationship wise in that way. I mean, that's just setting myself up for failure. It's like going to a mechanic that can't fix a car well.
Yeah.
I'm not going to have a car to get to work,
It's like my son says, he goes, I never take financial advice from broke people.
Very true. Very wise advice, man. Well, let's jump back over to the 5 A's, right? Okay. As far as the addiction, the abuse, apathy, avoidance, and atrophy. You had talked about like the addiction and the abuse can lead to the third the other three in that, 3, 4, 5. How does that happen? Because it's like addiction, man, Stephen, age of 10, introduced to porn. I understand that. Video games, alcohol. So I get that. The abuse, going through the physical and mental abuse of childhood abuse and that kind of stuff. I understand like how that impacted me, but how does that then potentially lead into like apathy and avoidance and atrophy? How does that transition or kind of move into those areas?
There's a couple of things there. One is, for me, the opposite of addiction isn't avoidance. It's actually connection. So when we're connected, the more connected we are to something, the less addicted we are. There's that famous rat and the heroin water, experiment. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but where they put a rat with heroin water in a cage by himself, and he got addicted to the heroin water. And then they put the rat in a different cage with a bunch of other rats, regular water and heroin water, and he only went to the heroin water like 2% of the time. The rest of the time it was at the regular water and was connected in. So it was kind of validating that addiction happens typically when we're isolated. And so, we become isolated, that easily can lead into being apathetic, or easily leads into avoidance. So we want to isolate. So we're already avoiding other people. And when we avoid other people, it doesn't give us an outlet. And so that usually fuels, more of the addiction side. But really, that avoidance, if I can't see it, it doesn't exist kind of thing, and we try to justify that by, well, that's a reality. There's a physical reality. If I physically don't see it, it must not physically exist. As long as I get into my car from the front end, then I don't have to see the tailgate that's falling off, of the bumper that's falling off of the back end. So therefore I never have to fix it, kind of thing. Apathy is the same kind of thing. It's just, we become apathetic. We just really, we give up. It's like a deeper sense of avoidance on the negative side, where we feel like, that's where we find ourselves. For me, it's where I find myself suicidal, or when mental health issues come up, especially for guys, like that's really where for me, I feel like a deep level of mental health comes from for guys. Is just, we become apathetic, because we're not taking accountability really, but it's I want to give up. Nothing's going to change. We get stuck in that seasons, that multiple, the multiple days of bad, the multiple days of suck. And so we're just like, I'm out of here. Like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. And so it takes, where I can avoid, walking around the side of the car, apathy is just like, well, we're just going to let the car sit there and rust and kind of never use it again. And that is a horrid place to be at, for any length of time. It's, for me, I can remember a time a few years ago where, I allowed apathy to just get into me, to where I had a backpack packed in a storage container, in the storage, kind of put away in the front of our RV, and had a couple $100 in cash in it, and some clothes and a tarp. And I was like, and, get to that point where I'm just going to leave everything. I'm going to grab that backpack. I'm just going to start walking, and wherever I end up, I end up. And that is to get to that depth into our psyche, is, it's heart wrenching when we get there. When you think about it, like I think about those times when I was there. I remember the day I actually unpacked that backpack. there was a freeing moment in that for me, of just like, I'm overcoming this power that I've given to being apathetic to my life. And so I still have the backpack. It has other things in it now. But whenever I see it, it doesn't have anything I could use. But when I see it, I'm like, it almost brings a smile to my face now, because I'm like, there's a sadness of like, wow, I was there. But it brings a smile to my face saying, I can overcome. Atrophy is like, that's like the checking out side of it. I'm not giving up on stuff. I'm just, like, I remember seasons in my life where I would come home and I would be present, physically present, but not mentally there. I'd come home and just sit on the couch or, watch TV, and, just say, my wife would be like, come in front of me and be like, hi, hello, hi. I'm your wife. Like, you're just so zoned out that it's almost like you don't even see it. And that's never good. It's one thing to say, I just want to veg out for a little bit, watch a TV show, maybe scroll social media for a little bit, gaming, whatever. Like, some of those things aren't bad. It's not everything is good with moderation, but there are certain things that are okay in moderation. Atrophy is, if I don't use a muscle, and that muscle can become atrophied, right? It can shrink. You see that if you've ever broken a leg or an arm, and you're in a cast for a couple of months, you get a cast off, you're like, all of a sudden you're like, that one appendage is a little bit less than the other one. And you're like, what the heck? It's the same kind of concept. When you don't use it, it withers away. And so I think when we don't engage and we're not present, our ability to become present and to stay present withers away. And it's not until we, again, take accountability for that.
So when you talked about having a backpack, in a storage container right there, ready to leave if things got to that point where you're just like, this is the breaking point. I can't handle it anymore. Later, y'all. How did you move from that and being that perspective, that mindset, that almost fear that's just waiting to, be pressed? How did you move from that to then saying, nope, I'm free of that. I'm going to unpack this bag and I'm going to stand firm and face what I'm in? Was that kind of like relationship based that kind of gave you the strength, or was there other stuff that you did to transition and move into that place of, not bailing and going, deuces, I'll see ya?
Man, a couple of things. I think from a supernatural aspect, I have a deep faith. And so I think there's an element of my belief system that, God held me from really doing something stupid. I think there's that piece that I believe in wholeheartedly. Not necessarily a physical holding, but just like an emotional, mental holding of like, this is, because there were a couple of times I grabbed the backpack. I can remember opening up the thing and grabbing the backpack and taking a deep breath, and then remembering the times that I've had of, when I was going through my addiction, I came out of a rehab, and in that time frame, wrestling with my faith and wrestling with God and feeling like, okay, God, I want to know what the end result is. And this like whole like conversation in my head of, that's not how I work, Steve. Like, you just, I make the plans, you just follow the plans. I'm like, no, I want to know the plans, kind of, and almost feeling like finally he said, okay, here. I had a dream of what my life would end up being, and kind of like the end result, so to speak. And I took that and I was like, okay, God, I know how to get us there. And I could almost feel God be like, no, that's not how we're going. But he let me go, and so there were times when, almost like as a father, your son's like, Dad, I want to show you something. So like he grabs your hand and he wants to take you someplace and you kind of let him go, but it might be over the edge. So you grab hold and stop him from going too far. Right. I feel like God has done that with me. And that's where if I get too far into the apathy or too far into the avoidance, too far into the atrophy, like that kind of pulls me, pulls me back with that. But he shared what I believe is kind of the fruition of my life. And so when I remember grabbing the backpack one day and thinking, this is it, I'm out, I'm done. And then having this thought of, that's not what I feel is the end result. So if this is the end result, this can't be the end. And there's a disconnect between what this would result in and what that results in. And so because I had that hope of what is coming, that hope from a supernatural aspect stopped me. I think another thing that practically helped me was journaling, and just journaling every day and having a guided journal. I would try to do a gratitude journal, but I'd also allow myself to do an angry journal entry, an appreciation versus gratitude, a prayer journal, mad, angry, whatever the emotion was, just, acknowledging it. And then, I invested in a program that, kind of taught us how to do some guided journals, around each of those emotions, and taught me how to step back and in all of those situations, look at it from my side. He called it walking the block of journaling, where, I just write out my story and where I'm at, and then take a look at, well, what does that look like? From that person's angle, what's the opposite? What's their perspective? What's the opposite perspective? And then ultimately, what is my ideal perspective for the story? Like, how, if I could choose any ending, how would I like this story to end? Because we all kind of, are the author of our stories and our path. And so in that, it really taught me how not to make, grandiose, like, oh, this would be the perfect ending, but like, this is it wasn't the perfect story. It was the ideal story. And there's a difference in that. And I think when you look at something on how you would like it to be ideally, it at least for us guys, it puts us in this mental state of like, oh, well, if this is what I want, here's how I get there. And so it really began to help me see things from a different perspective. So even though I would be angry, I could almost immediately journal whatever emotion I was hitting versus waiting, or versus really sitting in it for an excessively long amount of time in a negative sense. And so practically journaling helped me, getting involved and really having a friend that I could reach out to and just say, I just want to leave right now. I could literally pick up a phone and call I had two guys, and either text them or call them and just be like, I could just code word backpack, right? That was our code word. Like I can laugh at it now, but like there was a few times I just backpack, and that meant I was about to do something stupid and I didn't really want to. And so just in those repeated actions of taking a step forward versus a step back helped. I'm a self-proclaimed acronym junkie, I think, too. And so, I come up with like acronyms for everything, cause, that is how I grew up. But even like fear, like, everybody has, they're like face everything and rise, like acronym, right? For fear, or fear, flee everything and run, or something, like that's how you get away from, but for me, fear, I justified or explained fear to me as a failure to engage, act, or respond. And when I get fearful about something, most often I can just pull that acronym back up, and I'm like, okay, am I not engaging? So, and which would be avoiding, right? Am I not acting on something that I need to take action on? So it's just like that apathetic thing, and or am I not responding? So am I atrophying, just freezing and checking out, kind of to juxtapose that. But it really is, it's kind of summed up in there of just, if I don't engage, if I don't act, if I don't respond to whatever situation I'm in, that's where the fear increases. And when our fear increases, our ability to see clearly decreases.
That's so true, man. Can you, like you talked about ideal versus perfect, right? What's an actual situation that would have the perfect versus ideal?
What is the outcome that you're looking for? If the outcome that you're looking for is, say, peace in your relationship with your spouse, it doesn't have to be perfect all the time. That doesn't mean that there's an absence of conflict. But ideally, what happens is when conflict arises, you engage with it. When you don't avoid it. You don't pretend that it's not there. You don't, it's just like, it's, perfect would be, we never have any arguments or fighting going on. I mean, like my bank account is never below $10,000, whatever you want to put in there. Like, but I think differentiating to actual needs versus wants is, when our needs are met, we've almost kind of hit this ideal, and perfection is, I want this, I want that, I want that. And we reach for those, that the ultimate. And if we don't get it, we feel like we fail. But really, ideally, we have what we need. And I think that comes into being able to look at our life through different perspectives and different lenses. Like it's as you asked me that, it was funny, as I'm thinking, like, the one thing that I've always been told, throughout most of my adult life, you sit down, with my annual performance reviews for companies, right? And, when I was in the military, past military, one of the things that would always come up was my ability to step outside of myself and evaluate where I was at, and be able to say, yes, here's what I'm doing well, but here's what I'm struggling with, or here's what I'm doing poorly. And for the longest time, I thought everybody just did that. When we have the ability to step out and be non-biased about our situation, we can see this perfect thing from an ideal concept. I really don't have I'm really not having a bad day. I'm having a bad moment. Or I am having a bad day. Well, why am I having a bad day? Well, I expected no conflict. Now I have conflict. So now it's crap. But if I have conflict and then I go, oh, well, if I engage with that conflict and I have a conversation with the person who I'm in conflict with, and my goal is to reach a resolution in that conflict, it wasn't the perfect day, but the conflict is now gone. I haven't avoided it. I haven't checked out. I'm not looking at the conflict going, oh, that conflict sucks, so I'm just going to grab my backpack and leave.
Yeah, I almost look at it like, from the way you're describing it, Stephen, is that, it's not looking at my marriage like I'm never going to have an argument, or, my wife is always going to see me as being right. I wish I was always right, but that I haven't hit that point, and I don't ever think I will. It'll be right in as much as I understand things and have thought about it, but there are always other perspectives that I can bring to bear on something, right? And it's not looking at my kids of, hey, I won't ever make them mad, or they'll always say, you're the best dad. It's looking at it as, hey, yeah, they love me, they respect me, I'm doing the best I can in this situation. It's almost reframing it for a realistic, not an idealistic kind of value placement on it, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to be the best dad, the best husband, the grandfather, best grandfather that I can be. It doesn't mean that I'm going to nail it every time, but I'm going to do my best. And I like the way that comes about. The other thing that I like that you've walked us through, Stephen, is that, it's about having the healthy, right relationships for where we want to get, having the awareness of who we are, where we want to go, what we don't want to do or go, and having the relationships, choosing to put ourselves in a position of like, hey, Stephen, I'm struggling with this. Give me some insight, and what might you do? Not being without guidance or input. Even kings had advisors, right? So why would we not have advisors, those around us who can see something that we're maybe not aware of or blind to because of our experiences or beliefs about ourselves and life? I keep going back to, this is not me being perfect, nor is it about me lone wolfing life. Mm-hmm. This is about me taking it one day at a time and within a community of men who have my best interest and are wise in other areas that, I need wisdom in. Hey man, as we wrap up here, I just wanted to ask, hey, how can guys reach out to you outside of the podcast and connect?
I am super active. I'm all on the major social media channels. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. I hang out a lot on LinkedIn. And on my LinkedIn, I have a Calendly link too. So like if anybody wants to know more, feel free to schedule a chat with me and or connect with me on LinkedIn.
And Stephen, I totally appreciate you coming and sharing about relationships, not doing this solo, and then how things can lead into almost like further into the cavern of emotional detachment, right?
Yes.
And man, I so appreciate it. So thank you, my friend.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, Mike.
Absolutely.